Okay, so now that we've got the skirt assembled, we're going to attach the waistband. Remember a really long waistband piece, and we put the interfacing on it. We ironed that interfacing layer down so that it was really nice and stiff. We're going to attach that to the top of our skirt, okay? So we're going to open up our zipper, and on the waistband, we're going to look for the center front. So right in the center, we put a notch. If you forgot that step or you don't have it, you can basically just fold your waistband exactly in half. And that's where I want you to either clip a notch or take a little chalk and draw a notch, something like that. But just, we're looking for the dead center of the waistband. So this is our center front of the waistband. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna match that up to the center front of the skirt. And that's got a little notch in it too. And same, if you get to your skirt and you're like, oh, I don't have a center notch. Well, you can actually just fold it in half, and you could even do it from these two dart points. Fold them to where they touch, right in half, and there we go. That's your center, your dead center, okay? We're gonna put this together good to good, just like we always do. So obviously the good side of the waistband is the muslin side, and the bad side, the wrong side, is the interfacing side. And the good side of our skirt is the one that doesn't have these darts flapping around. So we're gonna pin this here at the center front. That's our first place that we're gonna start. And I'm gonna go ahead and pin on both sides of that cut notch to make sure we've got it. And then what our goal is to walk this around and pin all the way around until we get to the back, okay? So we're gonna put a pin in here at the dart to make sure that the dart continues facing the center front. We could put some pins in here at the side seam to make sure that the side seam that we pressed open stays pressed open. We could put a pin here at this last dart to make sure that that stays pressed towards the center back. And make sure too that you're following the shape of the skirt. The shape of the top of the skirt will now start to curve a bit because it's round to go along with the round, shape of the body. But the waistband piece that we're putting in is very flat. So make the two meet perfectly. And what's gonna happen is that you should have at least a 1/2 inch overhang of your waistband. It's okay if you have a little bit more, but at least as long as you have a 1/2 inch over. What you don't want is you to have nothing overhanging. You have to have at least like a little tiny bit, okay? And we'll do it all the way around. So we'll go back and we'll do the other side too. So we'll make sure that again, we've put a pin here to keep that dart in the right position. It has a tendency to try to move when you're sewing it and get out of place. So just pin like crazy. This is one of those times when you're just gonna have a lot of pins. And then again, making sure that you're not losing the subtle shape of the waist. Pin there. And then we'll go all the way to the end. And again, look, we've got, in my case, got a little more. I'd say like 3/4 of an inch overhang, but that's totally fine as long as you've got a 1/2 inch or a little bit more. I might have ended up making this waistband a little bit bigger than I needed to for this skirt. So now what you're gonna do, you've got it all pinned, is you're gonna sew these two together at a 1/2 inch all the way. So all the way around. It's gonna be awkward, it's gonna be weird, this thing's gonna try to move on you all the way. So you're gonna sew right off the edge over top of your zipper teeth there, and I'm gonna start a little bit further in, so I'm sewing it all the way around, okay? And I'm just sewing at a 1/2 inch. This will be a good long seam. Oh, and I do want to make sure, obviously I can't sew over this, so just kind of maybe avoid that, either sew right above it or right below it so that that big zipper stop doesn't end up trying to break your needle. Turn this on. And make sure when you're going over something like the dart that, again, it's not getting pressed in a direction that you don't mean it to. And you could also, just like anything now, make sure that you're not catching a bit of the skirt or the fabric that you don't want to. You can make adjustments as you go, but kind of feel underneath that you're not accidentally sewing another part of the skirt. Okay, so after we have sewn our entire waistband to our skirt, and again on both sides we're making sure that it hangs off about 1/2 inch, we can close up the sides. So we're going to fold it in half with good side touching good side. So basically I'm folding it so that, see, I've got the inner facing, this white stuff is on the outside. And then I can fold it right in half so that my two ends are touching, and all the seam allowance that I just created is just going to go down. Go ahead and put a pin or two in there just to hold that in place. Oh, just really want to make sure I line that up just right. Okay, there we go. And what we're going to do is sew a line that is directly in line with the outside of where our zipper is coming, with that outside seam. So I'm just going to take my chalk, or you could do this with a pencil, and see, I am just drawing a straight line. I'm going to imagine if I just went straight up from this line, that would be where I would sew. That way when it opens, when we flip it around, it's going to be right in line with this. So I'm going to do that on both sides. So I can come over here and sew that up. So again, I am just going to sew exactly in line with the edge. So pull that pin out of the way, and I'm just going straight up, right off the edge. So it should look like this. See how that is right in line, okay? And then big moment of reveal. I can tie this top end off. I'm going to do a double or triple knot to make sure it's really locked in place. I'll leave the bottom open because I'm still going to flip it down there. So I've tied that, and I can, especially if this is extra long on the side, I can trim it. So just like we did when we were turning our little pin cushion inside out, we can get rid of some of this excess, okay? And now I can flip it to the side, and you can see I've got this really nice line, okay? And that's what I'm going to do on both sides to close off my waistband. And then what's going to happen is on the inside, all of this seam allowance from the skirt is going to get pushed up inside the waistband, and the waistband has its own 1/2 inch seam allowance that's going to get turned under, and it's all going to be enclosed. So this is my, let me just get rid of this so as not to distract us, my extra thread from the seam I just sewed. And imagine my goal is now going to be to turn up everything, every little bit of thread or sloppy seam allowance is to turn it up inside into the waistband. So what I'll do is complete both sides of my waistband, sew them up just like I did, and I will go ahead and press them in half. So just directly in half, and you can do that if you're not sure by matching up the ends, the seam allowance and the end, and then you can get the very crisp right in half of the waistband. I'll press all of this seam allowance up into the waistband, and I'll press a 1/2 inch of the waistband under so that it will all look like this, okay? And I'll press it all the way around the waistband and get it all ready to lock in place. From the front, it should look nice and neat and pretty like this, with about 1.5 inch waistband actually showing. Okay, so now I have my waistband pressed, and it should look like this. Nice and neat all the way around. Here's the back, and it should line up just like this perfectly. The zipper obviously only comes to here. You could do it a different way where you have the zipper go all the way up into the waistband, or what commonly you see happen in this case is you would do a little hook and eye that you would hand sew in right up here, maybe even 2 little hooks and eyes, okay? And so what I've done, I'll open this up, is again I've just pressed the waistband in half, and I've pushed the skirt seam allowance up into the waistband, and then I've pressed the waistband seam allowance down so that everything inside can be enclosed really nicely, okay? And what I'll show you is how to now finish this waistband up on the machine or with a slip stitch. Okay, so say I was gonna do the machine stitch. I'll go ahead and open it up, and I'll take this one side, and what I'm going to do is sew a top stitch on the top of the waistband through all the layers, making sure that I'm also catching this seam back here. And you could take a pin and put this in like this, or again, it's kind of holding itself in place since I've already pressed it. But what I'll do is I am aiming to sew very close to this edge, but maybe about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and that way I can make sure to catch everything back here and that nothing comes out, okay? So whatever you do, just make sure it ends up being very consistent and neat and straight. And you're gonna wanna come right up to the edge. Definitely walk those first few stitches, and when you're in this position where you're going over a lot of fabric, you might have to kind of press just a little bit. You're going through, you know, like 6 to 8 different thicknesses right there. So sometimes it does not want to glide through as easily. So again, I can move that stitch, or sorry, move that pin, and I can just sew very close to that edge, okay? And I'm gonna stop just so I can show you what it looks like. So very close to that edge. I would obviously keep going and sew all the way. And then the big question is whether or not I actually caught everything here. So it looks like there's, these were my little stitches that I had to tie off from before. Looks like that's little threads from the dart. You can clip anything like this that's sort of hanging down, getting in your way, or see if you can tuck it up in there. But what you don't want to have happen is you to somehow have missed catching that fray of fabric. So you want to catch it all and make it look really nice and neat and finished, okay? And then say I was gonna tie this off. Again, I could pull it both to the back, if I can, and tie this in a little knot. Now, if I want to hand sew, instead of doing the machine stitch, which is a lot neater, doing the machine stitch, you have to have a really neat, even, perfectly straight top stitch that goes throughout. But if you want to do a more couture finish, or again, if you just want to have a little bit more control, you can do a hand slip stitch. So I've got a needle prepared, and I did go ahead and double the thread on the needle and tied a double knot on the end, and I can do a hand slip stitch on the other side. And so what I'll do is I'll just make sure to tuck everything up inside, and that's also where I'll end up hiding my knot. just like we did for the pincushion, okay? So now I've got my thread coming out of the fold, and I can just make sure to catch. I'll go right into the zipper tape, and I'm going to catch on both sides, and then I will go right across, but in the fold of that folded waistband. Okay, and then what I can do is actually also, in this case, I can go through my stitch right here. So instead of having to pick into the fabric, I can actually just catch right along that stitch where I have sewn the waistband to the skirt. And that way I make sure that I have no prick at all coming to the outside of the fabric. So notice I am just catching, hooking through one single stitch of my stitch here where I sewed the waistband to the skirt, and then coming right up into the fold of the waistband. Okay, so that looks really nice and neat, and I see nothing. Everything is hidden. I can really make sure to control everything that gets hidden inside, and from the outside it looks really nice and neat. So I like to do a slip stitch, but if you want, remember you can do the machine top stitch. You would just have to tie that off on the end, and obviously continue yours all the way across, okay? And making sure that it looks just as neat and nice on the inside as it does on the outside.